Today I'm speaking with Elbe Spurling. Elbe, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Tim.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to meet you. And I just want to give a quick bio for Elbe before we get started. Elbe grew up near Boston, but a few years ago, or quite a few years ago, moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. She's an accomplished artist and author with 18 titles in print. Wow. And that have been translated into 9 languages around the world. And her art has appeared in magazines such as Time, People, Rolling Stone, and Entertainment Weekly. She is best known for the Brick Bible Project, in which she spent 12 years illustrating the entire Bible in Lego bricks from the Garden of Eden to the Book of Revelation. And is it correct you are working on the Book of Mormon? Did I hear
That's
that?
right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's my current Lego project. Yeah, is I'm about 4 chapters in out of maybe 12.
That's awesome. Very cool. I look forward to picking those books up. Elby also received a bachelor's in philosophy and religion from Boston University, and she's continued her study of the Bible, ancient Christianity, and Judaism throughout her life. And this is where it's interesting. Her unique storytelling and illustrating style is renowned for her meticulous attention to detail and sense of whimsy and the ability to intertwine humor and poignancy. But you're using that to also bring out a new book called Salvation from Ancient Judaism to Christianity Without a Historical Jesus, which is a richly illustrated ebook that is a history book. And you currently have it for free on your website. I'll have the
Yes,
link
it's currently
beneath this.
free. You can, just go there and start reading. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was shocked to see that you're giving it out for free, and I really appreciate that. So I have the link for everyone who wants to go check it out. And also, LB began creating art pop music under the artist name LB, releasing her debut LP, Getting There, in the fall of 2016. I'll have the YouTube link for that as well. And that's what I know about you so far. But LB, tell us more about yourself and any hobbies or fun things.
Well, you hit on one of my favorite hobbies, making music. I don't know if you mentioned in that bio, I think anywhere, that I am transgender. I came out as transgender as a woman in 2015 and made an announcement on the Brick Bible fan page and just wanted to be out and let people know. And I've received a lot of thanks from others in the community to make it, who have said it's made it easier for them to come out and be themselves. And feel great about that. The tie-in with the music is, yeah, the album you mentioned, Getting There. It's like a concept album about gender transition and the highs and lows of it. In previous attempts at music, I had mostly written songs on guitar or keyboard and put in my own vocals. I tried to consciously take a really different approach now that I was presenting myself as LB, and so for that I accumulated, it was about 20 to 25,000 samples and loops, and I just spent like 2 weeks doing nothing but sorting them out by what they sounded like or which ones I liked best, and mostly just, which ones do I think sound awesome and would make a great song. And and then it was another few weeks of sort of like Lego, where I was, taking all these little samples from here and there and constructing the basis for the songs, and finally lyrics and melodies. And it's kind of weird and wonderful. People can check it out. But yeah,
Hmm.
that's me. That's me lately.
That's awesome. Well, I will just say I'm very, very jealous of your talents and abilities. I've wanted to be musical in life, and I unfortunately didn't. I've never caught up to it. I do make some a cappella songs for my kids just to go to sleep to, but that's about it so
Oh, that's
far.
great.
But it's just got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I love your creativity. And at this point, what I'd love to do is before we get into your books in more detail, I would
Mhm.
love to just invite you, if you could, to share your story. How did you get exposed, in youth to Christianity, to Jesus? Did you end up ever giving your life completely to Jesus? Did you, where did you fall in that category? And we'll talk through your story, and then as we wrap that up, we'll move into your awesome work with your books.
Sure. So, yeah, I was raised Christian. I was in a family that went to the Episcopal Church, and my mom was involved with the church, a Sunday school teacher for a number of years, and even became the Sunday school superintendent for a couple of years. So yeah, I was there every Sunday, Sunday school and church service, and I was friends with the minister, who seemed like a very kindly man. So that was my upbringing. This is you mentioned in Boston, so yeah, this is in the suburbs of Boston where I grew up. So I went to Bible camp for a couple of years, and yeah, you're wondering like whether I became a true believer. Well, I was certainly a believer. I believed in God. I prayed to God on a nightly basis during my childhood. Things started to change a little bit when I got to the age of 11 or 12 and 13. This was a time when I was kind of consciously, aware that childhood was sort of ending and it was time to become an adult. And I don't feel like that was something that was pressed on me from adults in my life. It was just kind of my own observations and what I wanted to do with my life. And so I had of course grown up playing with Lego. It was my favorite toy. But yet at that I should clarify that I was no child prodigy with the Lego. I was fine. I built some cool things, but nothing that would end up in a museum. So anyhow, around this age, I was kind of consciously trying to put away childhood things. The Lego got kind of boxed up and went down in the basement and storage, and the other childhood toys. And internally, it was also a process of just trying to shed what experts now would say is magical thinking. Um, to give an example, I remember like in elementary school, I would have things where like if I wore a blue shirt and then went to school and did well on a test, I would think I would, form a connection between the blue shirt and then if I wore a red shirt and did poorly or, I don't know why it was centered on things I wear, but I guess that's one thing I had agency over. And I think that's kind of at the core of this. You have limited control over how you're going to be scored on a test. Um, Other times I would associate like how I dressed with whether or not a girl I liked, smiled at me that day or kind of snubbed me. And I would form these connections. And part of me wanted to believe them because it would give me some agency in a situation where I had limited or no agency. And um, that lasted through my childhood, but that's the type of thing I started to question at that age. I was like, is it really the color of the shirt I'm wearing? Actually, like I've worn the blue shirt and she didn't smile at me or whatever. And eventually I just was like, it's sort of Occam's razor. I didn't know of that at the time, but I was like, isn't it simpler that, these things are just sort of random and these associations are magical thinking. And so I didn't set out to apply that sort of thinking to religion, but eventually I got around to it in terms of what I was thinking about. I guess another way to put it would be, it it felt like time in my life to separate what's real from what's make believe. Like make believe is such an important part of childhood, but eventually, as a part of growing up, as a part of maturing, you have to separate the two things, what's real and what's make believe. And you can still have fun with make believe, but you don't believe it's real anymore. Um,
It's ironic
so,
too that the Bible has even a verse, right, about when I was a child, I felt like a child, I behaved like a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. And it's interesting how it's sort of like the verse, the truth will set you free. Like there's a little irony there that when I
ah,
became an adult and when the truth set me free, I actually escaped Christianity. It's quite interesting.
right. So, so yeah, eventually, I think, especially with prayer, like I said, I was a nightly prayer, and I would, pray for the health and happiness of my family and those people I knew, and for world peace and such things. But, as a selfish child, I would also pray for, good things to happen to me in particular, or even if it was something where, a family member was sick, and I prayed for them to get better. Eventually I just realized, you can have this whole God structure who's supposed to be listening to your prayers, and sometimes he does, like, he's supposed to always listen, but sometimes he grants your prayers, and other times he doesn't, and he works in mysterious ways. So it just seemed like that was all a big construct that you could kind of just do without and just realize that, my aunt may get better or she may get worse, and the prayers really have nothing to do with it. And then, so,
Mm,
yeah, so for me, atheism wasn't something that was kind of like it dawned on me as an aha moment. It was something that of a process, and probably wasn't until I was about 13 years old that um, I was fully there. And even at that point, it was like, is the feeling of, well, I don't think there's a God, but if there is a God and he wants to punish me for not believing correctly, well, is that really a good God? Is that, it just seemed like I got to a point where I couldn't imagine a God existing who was a God I would actually want to worship. And then, then it just kind of faded out, and it seemed simpler to live my life without that belief.
mm. Could I ask, how did your family respond when you eventually vocalized your lack of faith? Were they okay with it?
Um, they were, yeah, they were a bit concerned at first, but not really outraged. I think they gave me some space. They wanted to see if I would come back to it. Um, but I think, the older I got, the more they recognized it was my decision. Yeah, as Episcopalians, it was not like fire and brimstone, so I was not warned that I was, going to burn in hell for all eternity if I didn't believe the right way. So I know a lot of guests on your show have had a much more intense indoctrination, and I'm really grateful that I didn't have that path in life. But it was a real turning point in my life because being the only atheist I knew, like this was, a few years before the internet was starting up, so there was no way to see that there were, thousands of other atheists. Um, there was, I really didn't know. I don't know if I had even heard of any famous atheists at that point. So it was kind of weirdly isolating. My town was nearly 100% Christian. And my family continued to be Christian. The nation was largely Christian, and so it was weird. It was weird to be the only one I knew, and it made a deep impression on me that has lasted all my life. As soon as I left Christianity, I became much more fascinated by it, and I wanted to know, like, how did this come to be, first of all? So, history of Christianity. I really wanted to know how it all happened to begin with. And I wanted to know why it had such a hold over people. I also wanted to, double check myself when I went to college. As you said in the bio, studied philosophy and religion, and the philosophy part was mostly philosophy of religion. And I really wanted to get to know the best arguments for Christianity to see if I was missing something, to see if I was wrong, and the best arguments for atheism. And that's when I also, read the Bible for myself for the first time, and studied the origins of Christianity.
Mm. It's amazing all the different angles people come at this from. Like you said, I've got people that I interview that are coming from very different perspectives and backgrounds in some ways in terms of the hellfire and brimstone messaging. And they've read the Bible 10 times by the time they're a teenager. But no matter which background we're all from, when we do get down to it and we really pull aside some of the maybe the cultural things and just say, what is the Bible actually claiming? Where did it come from? How do we know for sure that it's even, that we have the a legitimate copy of the originals? How do we know the chain of custody? Who's had it? Who's edited it? Who's in control of it? Which book should have been in the canon and which one should have been out? All these questions start to arise in our minds, and so many of us just start to realize, like, these questions are critical to the question of should you dedicate your life to this worldview or not? And
Right.
I'm just, even though your perspective, like your background, like you said, was different, and I'm so glad you didn't have that trauma of, if you turn from this, you will burn. Turn away from Christianity, you will burn in hell. I'm so glad you didn't have that. But it's so interesting that you, even though you didn't have that, you felt compelled to go back, because so many of us would echo that. We'd say, oh, I like to use the illustration of when someone is maybe kidnapped by somebody, and they, those situations where you hear about it from time to time, where someone really comes to appreciate and almost befriend their captor.
Oh,
And it's
sure.
like, and it's weird, they're willing to defend this person that kidnapped them, and they have to obviously have some counseling to get over that. But it's like when you wake up, you're like, what in the world was I stuck in, and why was I so in love with my captor? And it does, it compels you to go back and figure out what this whole religion was. It's interesting.
And it's not just, me or you being kidnapped. It's like, oh my God, they got like a billion people kidnapped. So that's why it was
Exactly.
so fascinating to me. It's like, how'd they do it?
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, in terms of, before we get into your book, we'll start with a little bit with the Brick Bible in a few minutes. But just what has the journey been like as you did go to college and start to do all this studying, and you began to think through it? Was there any sense of like religious trauma from anything that you did here in the church, whether it was condemnation or God is looking in your head and judging you? Was there anything that you felt like you really had to unpack, or did you feel like it was fairly benign and that you were basically able to reclaim your identity pretty quickly as a non-believer?
Fortunately for me, it was pretty benign. Yeah, I did not have as I said, the family who was hardcore and shaming me or threatening me. Quite the opposite. Have a loving, supporting family. They made peace that I was a non-believer, and over the years, I think they've all kind of shed their Christianity in stages as well. So I
Wow.
don't think any of my immediate family would now refer to themselves as Christians.
Hmm.
Maybe the Brick Bible had something to do with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's segue into that then. What took you from, obviously, your deconversion, which is so awesome that you were able to get out of that. What brought you from that phase to trying to depict it with your what would you call it? Is it a collage, or how would you describe what you do?
Oh, kind of Lego dioramas that
Okay,
are,
that's the word I was looking for.
carefully photographed. Yeah. Yeah, it started in college when I didn't start building with Lego in college, but the idea, the germ of it was from college when I first read the Bible on my own. I had read very little, almost nothing of the Bible, maybe a bit of the Gospels, and then heard bits of the Bible read in church, but they kind of stick to about 5% of the Bible, and then there's this other 95 that most people, unless they're reading the Bible on their own time, uh, don't know. And so it was such a powerful experience to read the Bible for myself, cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, and just yeah, as I was going, it was very different than I expected. I expected, I think, maybe some dry theological treatise that would be boring and really put me to sleep. But you open up Genesis and it's these vivid, sometimes lurid stories right from the get-go, and it keeps up throughout the Hebrew Bible, through Judges and whatnot. Eventually get to like Jonah, and I was just, I don't know, at times shocked, at times amused, and at times just really intrigued. And the overarching feeling I had was, I don't think people know what's in this book. And at the same time, I know that, if you polled people and they said, what book is, the greatest moral guide that human beings have, they would certainly say the Bible. It would be right up there at the top. And when I read what was in the Bible, I was like, I don't know. That's pretty bold.
It is. It's
So yeah, it
crazy.
was that feeling that it would be better off if people knew what was in the Bible. And yeah, from the start, it was always like, I'm not out to make atheists. I'm not out to deconvert people. And I'm also not out to convert people. I just want people to know what's in the Bible, because people aren't picking up the Bible and reading it for themselves. And it would be better if they did. Then they could, make up their own mind in a much more informed way than the very little bit of the Bible they get in church. So
That's awesome.
that was the idea, but it was not until I didn't know quite what to do with it for a couple of years. And it was just after college, about a year out of college, I moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area. And my girlfriend and I, right around the time eBay was starting, we were we were thinking, oh, it would be cool to get some Lego. Like I brought my old Lego out with me, and we had, this nice box of it, but we wanted more. And my girlfriend was always wanted Lego because she had grown up with brothers, and the brothers always got Lego on their birthdays, and she would get Barbie, and she didn't want Barbie, she wanted the Lego. So this was really cool for both of us, and right at the start of eBay, there were a lot of good deals, and we ended up with our living room full of these boxes of Lego, and I was like sorting them out into pieces and whatnot, and had a first few things. Like I said, I wasn't a prodigy builder as a kid. It was really my building skills started as an adult, and so the first couple of things I built were like an 8 foot tall skyscraper, sort of Manhattan style Chrysler building-esque skyscraper. And that was just because I wanted to build something huge because we had all this Lego. And I never had this much as a kid. And it was a really good exercise. It taught me a bit about the building process. And then I challenged myself to build something round out of, square rectangular bricks, and I built a round like Roman style Colosseum. And I was like, okay, I'm getting a little bit good at this. And then I was like, we have so much Lego at this point that I really need a project to put it all to use. Otherwise, it would be kind of criminal to just be hoarding it. So that is when I first thought, well, I had that idea, way back in college to try to find a way to get people to actually read the Bible, but I didn't know how I would do it. And that's when the two ideas came together, and I thought, all right, I will try this out. I will try building a few scenes from the Bible in Lego. And of course, I started with the Garden of Eden, and it was, this huge 8 foot by 4 foot set. And of course, I needed a Lego Adam and Eve with the little fig leaves and a snake. Fortunately, they had a snake, had it dangling down from a tree. And then it was time to do Lego God. And for each of these Lego people, since their faces really don't change, I had to, kind of look at all the stories they appear in and figure what is the essence of their character such that I should pick a certain face. And Adam and Eve were easy. I just went with the traditional Lego smiley face, like the only face that Lego produced from the 70s up through
Right.
the 90s. Um, and that seemed right. But God, yeah, God had to look like God. Fortunately, they had a white wizard beard, and that was perfect. Um, they did not have white hair at the time, so I had to sort of improvise. Took a white space helmet and cut off the chin strap, carved a few bangs. I generally don't alter the Lego except in extreme emergencies like this. Um, and then for God's face, I found they had like a Lego samurai set, and they had like a samurai master, and he had big white puffy eyebrows that were sort of indented, like he was very serious or a little bit angry, and and a little bit of eye wrinkles to give him age. And I put them together, and I was like, oh, that's pretty perfect. Yeah, this is a god who's going to suit this scene, and all the others that he's in.
Now, can I ask you, when you first did this, you weren't doing this at that moment to create a book. You were just working to do pictures for the website. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. At first, I didn't know what I was doing when I made the Garden of Eden. I just wanted to see if I could actually create some nice biblical scenes. I was going to do that. I was going to do the Last Supper, but I got caught up, and it really wasn't until I had the garden built, and then I had a nice early digital camera that could really get up like 2 centimeters away from the character and get them into sharp focus and throw everything else into a blur. And again, I wasn't a great photographer at the time. I really learned as I was going. But that look, having the crisp Lego people in front, just and a blurry background, really gave it a cinematic look that really appealed to people when I did put it online. So I did do the Garden of Eden story, the fall of mankind, Cain and Abel, and up through Noah's Ark, and then I put those 6 stories online, and it really just took off. I just told my friends and family about it, and I really just thought that might be the end of it. They would just find it amusing, and maybe I'll continue the project, maybe I won't. But just the response was overwhelming, and the traffic to the site was crazy. And within a few months, there was newspaper and magazines were covering it, and it was great. So how could I stop, you know?
And they weren't
It
seeing it at
really,
that point as like a mockery of the Bible. They were just seeing it as an illustration of the Bible, right? For the
oh,
most part.
it depended on who you were. From the start, I wanted to tell the Bible stories as the Bible itself tells them. So each one, the text of it is just pulled straight from the Bible with chapter and verse cited. And I do illustrate with a bit of a sense of humor, a sense of whimsy, but I it's not really done to mock the Bible. If you, yeah, I present these stories, and if you find them wacky, then you find them wacky, and you'd probably find them wacky if you read them in the Bible.
Yeah.
If you find them amazing and they increase your faith, you'd probably find the same thing if you read it in the Bible yourself. Always I felt like this is a proxy for picking up the Bible and reading it for yourself. I don't try to put too much of a stamp on it. As I said, I illustrate with a sense of humor because I think that and that combined with just really nice visuals in the images, that's what keeps people reading. That's what draws people in.
Hmm. And then you eventually turned it into a book. Was that
Yeah,
planned or is
yeah.
that
It's
for the moment?
been as as I mentioned, I have like 18 books in print. I think 16 of them are Brick Bible books. It started way back in 2003, where a small publisher named Quark Books did like 10 stories from Genesis, followed up with 10 stories from Exodus, and then the Christmas story. And then for a few years, I didn't even have a publisher. But I was, there was still enough attention to the website, and I was enjoying it enough that by that point I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do the whole Bible. Um,
Yep.
so, at that point, I'm doing, Exodus, and then I had a lot of fun doing the laws of Moses, because I kind of set those in modern times and showed here's what life would be like today if you followed the laws of Moses. So there's a lot of room for whimsy, shall we say, in that. Um,
Well, those stories are pretty nasty. So even
Oh, there's
if you're
some violence and gore and a little bit of sex.
it's amazing too that
Yeah,
when
so
just to go to your point that you mentioned before, like a lot of people just don't know what's in it. It's really crazy.
exactly. Yeah, they probably like me thought it's a dry theological treatise, or they just think it's all love and joy and God, blessing people. Um, but yeah, so anyway, I kept going with it. Did the entirety of the New Testament and the Old Testament all the way up to I think Second Kings, and later added like Book of Daniel and Book of Jonah. So just about all the narrative content from the Bible. And then in 2010, I got contacted by another publisher who was really ambitious, and they were like, let's do the entire Bible as one book. And I was like, that's going to be 1,200 pages. And they were like, let's do the Old Testament as one book and see how that goes. And I was like, okay, yeah, that that'll probably work. So yeah, we kind of crammed all of or most of the Old Testament into one book, and that became by far the best-selling book I had done.
Do you remember how
It
many
was
pages that one was?
Yeah,
approximately?
let's see. I have it right here.
Nice.
Let's see.
And by the way, for everyone, I'll have all the links for through Amazon and through your website, so everyone can go pick these up if you want to.
I think 270 pages.
Okay, so you cut it down significantly for that. Okay,
Yeah, and then the New Testament is not as long. This came out a year afterward, and also another 270 pages, but got to be a bit more inclusive. In fact, I illustrated, I think, 200 more scenes that I hadn't gotten to fill that one out. So that was a lot of fun.
I had a question for you just about the actual production. When you like get done a scene and you've taken your photographs of it, is there any angst or like regret of like, I know I need to tear this down and get ready for the next scene, but I like this is really cool. I'd love to just preserve it and just get a new set of Legos for the next one. I know you couldn't have you'd have to have a huge house to kind of have it as a museum to all those scenes, but is it hard to break one scene down when you're done?
It was hard at first, and then it became routine.
Yeah,
And it was always the same process where I would have a set, especially if it was an elaborate set. I would make sure I didn't need to use it again, like, 10 stories down the line, which, occasionally happened. But then, yeah, just about everything, 99% of what I built got torn down because otherwise I would have run out of bricks, and run, as you said, run out of space in the house. There are a few exceptions where I liked the builds so much I kept it around. That's like the Last Supper. That's like a pretty perfect recreation of Da Vinci's Last Supper. And the Temple of Solomon was a really nice build that I kept up. And let's see, the whale from Jonah and the Whale is really cool. So,
that's awesome. Did you
but
do one, I assume, of the cross and
what's that?
the cross and the tomb of Jesus?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Yep, did the crucifixion story and the empty tomb. Yeah,
I
the
mean, did you
biggest.
feel compelled to keep that one?
Oh, the I think the tomb I kept around for a while because it was just kind of a nice rock wall build and it could be reused as a set
Gotcha.
or even as a cave. The crucifixion, there wasn't actually a lot to it because it's cavalry. I don't know, I guess nobody knows quite what it looks like. For me, it had kind of a micro scale Jerusalem city in the background, but mainly it was just kind of a plain hill with the three crosses on it. The biggest challenge for that was how do you get the arms out like this because in Lego they're locked in and they can only go up and down. So yeah, my solution for that was to pop the arms off, which fortunately you can do. And then had the wrists with Lego, like little Lego rubber bands, official Lego, and those were holding them to the cross. And then the arms were positioned like this, but here they were pressing against the torso, and that's what was actually holding up the whole body is just the pressure from the arms. So it was a neat little build, but I didn't feel the need to, even though I did, have to duplicate the cross a few other times. Once you get the technique, it was fairly simple.
Mm, that's so cool. That's so cool. Well, I'd love to hear as well about this other book because this other book is really, as we were chatting about before we started recording, this is really cool stuff because you've turned your attention from just like pure creativity. And I mean, it took a lot of research, I'm sure, to read through all those texts and figure out how you wanted to picture it with the Legos. But your next book here that we're going to talk about is really fascinating because you're looking at a big question that a lot of us have asked, and that is it possible that this religion started without a historical Jesus?
Mhm.
And of course, that belief, if people do think that that is likely, more likely than not, we call it mythicism. And there's a lot of people that are very divided on this. Fortunately, for those of us who are atheists, we really don't care at the end of the day. It doesn't matter whether there was a historical guy at the beginning named Jesus or this was all made up. We're still not going to believe it. It's all mythology and legend. So it's really just it's a fun, interesting study to do, but it's not going to change our lives one way or the other. But there is some interesting stuff that comes out when you really dig deep into this. And I do think even though it doesn't matter to us, it is interesting because it does matter to Christians. It really would matter to them a lot if there was not a historical Jesus. So, like, what got you interested in the first place in even asking that question, starting to dig into what the research was, and what did you find? Because this is such a cool thing.
Yeah, this goes back to college also. I think that's where I first somehow heard the notion that, it's possible that there wasn't actually a historical Jesus. And I remember asking my professor about that in one of my first religion classes to see if there was any merit to it. And he kind of poo-pooed the idea and said, like, no, scholars have looked into it, and as you see in this book that you're signed, um, there's generally agreement that there was a historical Jesus. It's just people greatly disagree about what that historical person was like. So for me, it started way back then. But for a while, I believed my professor and went on to study under Pollock Fredrickson, who wrote From Jesus to Christ, which I found to be a compelling argument. And that's pretty much the same as you would see with Bart Ehrman or Reza Aslan and their recent books. And that's, painting the historical Jesus, basing it first of all on the what's supposed to be bedrock knowledge that he was crucified by the Romans. And if he's crucified by the Romans, then surely they only crucified rebels against the state. That was why people got crucified. So therefore, Jesus was some sort of rebel, zealot, as Reza Aslan calls him. And it's a pretty good argument and had me convinced for, I don't know, maybe 10 years out of college. And as you said, even though I'm utterly fascinated by this topic, and I've been studying it for a couple of decades. I've been really intensely studying it for the past 6 years. Finally, decided to write up my best thoughts on it. And but as you point out, like, yeah, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, probably Reza Aslan, Bart Ehrman, Paula Fredrickson, probably they're right. But I think I'm right. I feel like they're missing something very important, and I'm going to put it out there, and maybe it will have an influence on the way people think. For me, the biggest change came when I came across Earl Doherty's writings on the internet, and he was someone who also just made a website and gave it away for free, and I think just wanted to have his contrary opinion be heard. And I found him fascinating. I didn't think he was the best writer, but I feel like his analysis was excellent and really turned me on to this idea. And for those who are unfamiliar with the writings of Earl Doherty, the biggest thing that he pointed out was that the earliest Christian writings, really the first 70 to 100 years of Christian writings, do not mention a historical Jesus. It's bizarre when you realize it's true. And this includes the 7 of Paul's authentic letters. And for people who are not familiar with that, Paul has 14 letters, 13 letters in the New Testament. Scholars are really in agreement that some of them are forgeries, but they believe that 7 of them were actually written in the 50s CE by Paul. And when you examine those, like if you had never read the Gospels and you just look at those letters by Paul, you really get no demonstration that he knows of a Jesus who just lived, who just died, who worked miracles, healings, who taught anything. He never quotes Jesus on anything, even though he talks about subjects that later show up with in the Gospels where Jesus is giving direct teachings about them. And he never mentions the place names that you find in the Bible. He never mentions anyone in Jesus's family. He never mentions disciples. He never mentions any sort of earthly chain of command that of teachings as you might expect. It's really shocking once you realize it, and then you can apply the same filter to other earliest documents like Hebrews, the Epistle of James, Epistle of Peter, Clement, the Didache, which is the teaching of the apostles. I would say also the Book of Revelation. I date that a little earlier than others do. But yeah, again, read the Book of Revelation without kind of the gospel blinders on, and you're like, there's no historical Jesus here, and that's really weird. And then there's another less known book that didn't make it into the Bible called The Ascension of Isaiah. And that was brought to my attention by Earl Doherty. And that's possibly the most fascinating of these early documents to me, because again, if you read Paul, he seems to weirdly describe Jesus only in heavenly terms. Even his crucifixion is, he says, was brought about not by the Romans, not by the Jews, but by the archons and powers of our time. And scholars are unanimous in believing he's referring to like demons that live in the sky. And so Jesus, you get the sense, is was crucified not in heaven and not on earth, but in what's known as what was known to ancients as the firmament, the space between the earth and the moon, which was inhabited by Satan and demons. So the Ascension of Isaiah seems to have the exact same theology, but in much greater detail. It has God telling the Son of God exactly what he's going to do. He's going to descend through each of the levels of heaven and disguise himself so that no one recognizes him. And when he gets to the firmament, there he will be crucified and then reascend to heaven, and actually only at that point take on the name of Jesus. And that's the same theology you find in Hebrews, where the name Jesus is something adopted after he has performed his atoning sacrifice. So anyway, Earl Doherty was really the gateway for me into. I really don't like the name mythicism or mythic. Yeah, I prefer non-historical Jesus or ahistorical Jesus. I don't know, something about mythicism has this weird connotation that I think turns people off. They're saying like, "What do you mean? You think my God is just a myth?" But so I try to avoid it, but it amounts to the same thing.
Well, I think it does still. The reason I think that it can have some value to us is this: it's emphasizing that this is just another version of mythology. Because if you look at all the Greco-Roman mystery cults, they were going to carry some of the similar motifs. Of course, they weren't going to have the same Jewish angelology behind them as the background, but there's a lot of similar motifs happening, and you see it in the Gospels. Of course, they're copying the gods left and right. You know, from Dionysius to Helios, they're copying these gods, and so I think it helps me to put it in the category of like, yeah, the name might carry some baggage to some people, but at the end of the day, what we're saying is this is ultimately, in terms of like, not just the academic study, but just in the sense of like, should you place your faith in this? It's like, well, only in the sense that you would place your faith in any other mythology. Like, if you want to believe in this, then you might as well believe in Dionysius as your, Lord and Savior. I think that helps me to put it in that category, because I think a lot of Christians would be, if that could ever be proven, and I know it can't, but if it could be proven that Jesus was just a made up literary character, they would be just shocked to realize that they're truly placing their entire life and worldview and afterlife, as if they had one, placing it all on mythology, and they would just be like shocked to death if they could actually see that proven.
So I feel a little bit differently from you on that one. I feel like my view actually gives Christianity the possibility of continuing, but with a belief in only a heavenly Jesus, as I'm saying the first generations of Christians believed in. And so again, with the Brick Bible, I'm not out to destroy Christianity. And with this book, I'm not trying to. With this book, I'm trying to solve a mystery that has fascinated me for a couple of decades. I don't expect many Christians to read it, especially anyone who's conservative, and that's fine. It's really aimed at those who have maybe heard of this theory, mythicism, and want to check it out. Another thing that really inspired me to create this book is so I should mention, after reading Earl Doherty and being have my mind changed by that, it was fascinating to me. I still had questions like, okay, this is just like some independent scholar. Can we have some more credentialed scholar take a look at it? And that's where Richard Carrier came into the picture and had a review of Earl Doherty's work, and where he was saying, yeah, this is pretty legit. And over the years, became more of a mythicist himself. So then I was like, okay, this is not, just nonsense. This is pretty real. And then, Carrier's had a number of books since then on the subject, and I appreciate his analysis. But I feel like both with Doherty and Carrier, they're making one argument for a mythic Jesus, and their book just makes the case and defends it against challenges. And that's critically important for it. But it left me feeling like, okay, if I take what you're saying as true, that there wasn't a historical Jesus, then I'm back to, how did Christianity actually form without a historical Jesus? So, as you see in the subtitle of my book, I really wanted to put it all in context and tell a coherent story from the formation of Judaism up through the I'll give a little bit of spoilers in my book, from the creation of Judaism to its various sects, including the Essenes that were the most influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism and adopted many of their theologies into what they believed. And the Essenes, of course, famous for writing the Dead Sea Scrolls, in which you see just and from the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves and from ancient historians describing these scenes, you just get this ridiculously long list of similarities between the Essenes, who were in existence before Christianity, and the first Christians. And there's so much overlap that it became impossible for me to believe that the first Christians did not come out of the Essene movement. And I would say that it is Peter and James, who we know were the earliest founders and people who ran the first church, Christian church in Jerusalem. I would say that it is those two who are responsible for the actual birth of Christianity, and I would assume that they had religious visions that combined with both the Essenes and the first Christians. One of the greatest things they had in common was that they were obsessed with reading the Hebrew Bible and pulling out bits of it, especially from the prophets, that they interpreted as relating, a kind of had a secret message for the current day, and usually about the end times. And so the Essenes were doing that, and then immediately after them or concurrently with them, the first Christians were doing that. So I would say that Peter and James likely had religious visions that were profoundly influenced by, what they were pulling out of these ancient scriptures and interpreting as prophecy. And they had a vision of a Messiah who was crucified again in the firmament, not someone who came to earth. And that was the original message of Christianity.
And the Book of Enoch brings some of those motifs in too. Is that right?
Yeah. Again, big overlap. The Essenes treated the Book of Enoch as scripture, and so did the first Christians. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk about, to go back to when I first read the Bible in college, I found one of the most jarring things was when you finish the Old Testament and then you start reading the New Testament. The theology is it's kind of whiplash. It's like, okay, suddenly there's this Satan character who's incredibly powerful and rivals God, and the world has been given over to Satan until the end times. It's like nothing in the Hebrew Bible prepares you for that. There's a couple mentions of Satan as some different character in the Hebrew Bible, but suddenly he's just this huge main character and incredibly powerful. He's got like an army of demons that live in the firmament, and they're infesting the earth also and possessing people left and right. Like, where did any of that come from? It's weird. And it just struck me then that there must be some sort of missing link between the theology of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. It's not just that like Satan and the demons appear. It's like they're talked about as if you already know who they are and what
Right.
they're up to. There's no, hey, here's this new character named Satan, and here's some information about him. He's really important. It's just like, and then Satan showed up, and then this person was like, infected with demons.
Well, part
Um,
of it too is that there's all these other books that we just, as Christians, don't really know about, and like there are other books that do fill in those gaps, like Enoch and Jubilees and all
exactly.
these other books, but we're ignorant of it. And I remember even when I was growing up in a Christian school, they just kind of, as a very overly simplistic explanation, just said God spoke through the Old Testament, and then there was God providentially, for some reason, chose 400 silent years where he just didn't speak at all. And then he spoke again, and we don't know why, but that's what he did. He chose to
He
be quiet.
barely speaks again. He has like two lines of dialogue in the entire New Testament.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I mean, in the sense of
and
like
when
they
he
act
does
like,
speak, he's just quoting the Old Testament.
right. But I mean, that like we were just kind of taught that for 400 years there was nothing else added to the canon, and
Mm,
yet the idea of a formed canon wasn't really there yet. That didn't come till later. But in the sense of like, is God still speaking through people? There were other books, we just were never told about them because they never made it into the canon. But it's like, technically, I think if you could have asked those Jewish, mystics and Gnostics and all that from those 400 years, what's God doing? They wouldn't have said God's silent. They would have said, are you kidding me? We've got books all over the place. God's doing
yeah,
incredible messages to us. We just need to figure out what it means and how to piece it together. But he's not silent at all.
right. Yeah, that intertestamental period, as it's called, is really fascinating, and that's one of the things I just dove into with great interest when researching this book because I really had to figure out what is that missing link. And sure enough, it seemed to start with the Enoch writings. The Book of Watchers seemed to be the first place where all of these Zoroastrian ideas are suddenly incorporated into one form of Judaism, at least. And yeah, as you said, there are all these other writings that didn't make it into the Bible for reasons that people living 200 years later had for doing that. Yeah, for people who are interested in that intertestamental period, I do recommend checking out my book. It's and it will talk about all those writings that were created during that time.
It's interesting too, just as a quick, maybe sarcastic note to Christians. We were always told in church, the pastor would just hammer it almost, it seemed like almost every sermon. The pastor would say, don't try to interpret this passage unless you have the context. So they'd say this verse is in a paragraph, which is in a chapter, which is in a book, which is in part of the Bible. It's like you got to understand what the context is, and you can't take it, just rip it out of context. You got to know what's around it on many levels, and not just the context of the books that it's in, but the cultural context. If he's writing to the Ephesians, what were the Ephesians thinking? Put yourself in their mindset. And it was just this constant push. And it literally was almost obnoxiously in our face, get the context or you're going to get it wrong. And when I realized that the whole Second Temple Judaism context is just missing from almost all biblical studies and Bible colleges, I was like, wait a second, you've been telling us for decades to get the context,
Mm.
and you never told us the full context. And this context, like that you're talking about, is massive. It's huge. Like you cannot interpret the New Testament correctly without that information. I mean, you really can't.
Oh yeah, agreed. Yeah.
When you look through this, if you were to give us cliff notes, I mean, we're looking at things like you said, archangels, angels and demons. Do you think they literally just thought that Jesus was just another angel that had done something spectacular, and that it was actually salvific, though, that it could create salvation for humans?
Well, it does seem like just before the time of the first Christians, there were theologians like Philo of Alexandria who were um, there was this idea that God was kind of uh, compared to the Old Testament was receding away from humanity and just becoming more transcendent, and that's kind of under the influence of Greek philosophy. And the thing about religions that posit such a transcendent God, then there's this kind of gap they have where people want to be able to commune with their God, but if he's so far away and transcendent and not getting involved with people, that there's just this need that people have, and that's why it usually turns out that they'll invent some sort of intermediary figure, and that's I think how like Philo even has a number of names for this figure in Judaism, but does actually use the phrase "Son of God" to refer to him. And the idea is that if you want to commune with God, it has to be through this intermediary figure, the Son of God. And
He calls them
there,
as well the Logos, right? From same as John chapter 1.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. The Logos. And yeah, so I think Philo had a serious influence over the Essenes and similar groups. And that is probably where this idea came from. I think it was then rounded out with the Essenes' idea of a Messiah that was much more of a militant Messiah. The Essenes pictured a very violent, apocalyptic end times that they thought was coming at any moment with the arrival of a Messiah on the clouds, much like the first Christians. And the Essenes were also militantly anti-Roman. If you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, that becomes very clear.
And they
So
expected to fight with the angels against them, right? They were going to take up arms themselves and kind of be co-warriors.
exactly. They're known from historians as a peaceful lot, but basically they're if you read their writings, we're like, yes, peace until it's time to get it on. And they fully expected a Messiah with an army of angels would liberate them from the Roman overlords and all the enemies of the Jews and establish a new paradise on earth. Yeah,
Hmm.
very much the same as the first Christians.
From what you understand of that time frame, and I know all this is conjecture, so call what we're talking about, your best guess. But what do you think is the relationship between Paul and the other early church founders? James and Peter. Was Paul a usurper? Was he the spouter of lies? Like, who was Paul compared to the other guys?
Yeah, Paul is fascinating. Paul seems to have aristocratic connections to Herod, and spoke Greek as first language, and is quite different than what we think we know about the earliest Jerusalem apostles like Peter and James. Um, Peter and James, the first Christians, are also extremely anti-Roman. They really, really overlap with the Essenes, and I would say probably were Essenes. They had the utmost respect for the law of Moses, and even in the Epistle of James, he's saying, as Jesus does in Matthew, that you have to follow the letter of the law exactly, or you're not going to find salvation. So Paul comes a little bit late to the movement. By his own admission, he's the last of the apostles. And Paul is converted, he says, in Damascus. And it's unclear exactly by who and what their theology was, but the theology that Paul comes away with is remarkably different than that of the founders. And Paul says he converted, but he didn't then go to Jerusalem to meet the founders. He goes off to Arabia, and then I think it's after 14 years, or maybe after 3 years, he goes to Jerusalem and then doesn't visit for another 14 years. But he only spends a few days with the founders, and then he goes off and starts preaching. But instead of having the utmost respect for the law of Moses and preaching that it must be followed to the letter, he's remarkably different and says that the law is this yoke that must be cast off. And it's unclear exactly how his theology relates to the earliest Christians. We just don't have that many documents from like James and Peter and their crowd. We mostly have Paul's side of the story, and there's every evidence that the original Christians are bristling every time they have to deal with Paul. And there are some intriguing possibilities that Paul started a riot in the temple in which James was pushed down a set of stairs and his leg broken. That's from the Recognitions of Clement, which is kind of a later document, but probably on par with Acts of the Apostles in terms of what's actually history in such a book. And yeah, there's also the very intriguing idea put forth by Robert Eisenman that Paul was actually referred to in some of the last of the written Dead Sea Scrolls, where they describe a spouter of lies who is going around teaching the opposite of what the true church believes.
It's so fascinating. Just number one, obviously, just conjecturing, even though we can't come to any firm conclusions. But it does help you as you think through these things to go back. I think as a former Christian, of course, I was very much into, I was a fundamentalist Christian. I wanted to be a pastor and a missionary and a church planner.
Mm-hmm.
But this was my bread and butter. But it makes you think there's so many critical questions. And one of the most important ones to me was wrapping my mind around the idea that Paul is truly opposed to a lot of the things that Peter and James are talking about. He even says it like in Galatians, I oppose them to their face. And then, of course, the book of James, talks very directly against the whole idea of faith alone. It's faith plus works. But you just, even stepping back from this specific text, you just think, why would Paul, knowing that he technically, in this worldview, he loves Jesus. Now, Jesus is his Savior, his Lord. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is everything. You'd think that he would be looking at the disciples that walked with Jesus for the last either 1 year or 3 years, depending on which gospel you're looking at, that these disciples that walked with him and talked with him and ate food with him, that he'd just be like, I need to know everything. Tell me everything. What did he say? What did he do? What was it like? Did he snore? Just everything. Who is this? Who is Jesus? And I need to write this down, please. And since I speak Greek, I can write this down in Greek too. And we can get it in 2 languages now. We can get it in Aramaic and in Greek and just spread the word everywhere. But he's like, I don't really care what you all went through. I don't care that you spent all this time with Jesus in the flesh. I had a vision, and I'm just going to take that and run with it and kind of to hell with you all. And the lack of humility and the lack of teachability and just the lack of interest to say, why don't you want to know what Jesus did for the last, all this time on the earth? He's never come before. We don't know when he's coming again. Came for this one brief period of time. And there's only a limited number of people who actually saw him that closely and intimately. And you don't care to know anything about it? That doesn't make any sense. And yet Paul's basically the founder that we all hail King Paul. It's like, he's the main theologian for us. And when you really step back from it, regardless of whether it was Essene or whatever, just that fact alone should be enough to shake Christians up and say, we don't really understand how this thing started. And there's some really big plot holes in this thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Paul is odd in that he shows, as you said, no interest in getting to know the disciples, getting to know the people who supposedly walked and talked with Jesus, doesn't have any interest in his family and the disciples. In the book, I have a long list of all the things that you would expect Paul to be all on top of, really fascinated by, and he shows none of the interest. He's always saying, I didn't get any of this teaching from other people. All of it came to me in visions and straight from Jesus. And it's weird. But then again, if you flip it around and think, oh, well, if there wasn't actually a Jesus who just lived, this kind of makes sense, because then, like Peter and James, they also were getting their information about Jesus through visions. And that's basically what Paul presents in his letters. He has that list of people who the Lord appeared to, and he isn't talking about appeared to in person. He's talking about visions, and he's saying, first Peter, then I forget the exact list, and the 3, then 500 brothers, and finally me at the end.
And the interesting
yeah,
thing is, we don't
Paul's
know too what they were smoking back then. They may have been smoking some good stuff, and that may be what this. I know that some people have conjectured that, but that we don't know. I'm not saying that I believe it did happen from some good drugs, but you just don't know. You just really don't know how this thing started. And when they say we all had visions, I know you can elicit visions by, sleep deprivation and by fasting, all kinds of ways you can do this. But it does make you wonder at the end of the day, just again coming at it not from the scholarly perspective, but just the Christ of faith saying, I don't know how this thing that I gave my whole life to, I don't know how it started. And any number of these theories might have some merit to it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, obviously it's fascinated me for forever, basically.
Mm. So when you look at this, what would you say at the end of the day is you mentioned Zoroastrianism, if I can say it right. Um, how much of this is related to that ancient religion? I know enough of Zoroastrianism to be dangerous. I know a little bit, but how much of Christianity is stemming right from Zoroastrianism?
Well, yeah, my book kind of bucks the consensus on a couple of things. One is the ahistoricity of Jesus. The other is around the formation of Judaism, and basically, I put forth the idea that Israelite religion lasted as polytheistic. You know, they had the Levantine pantheon of gods with Yahweh at the top, or El, and they had consorts just like the rest. And this was the case up until the Babylonian captivity, 589 BCE. So the Bible tells a certain story of the returnees from the Babylonian captivity, and I've been convinced now that you really have to kind of read between the lines when they talk about the returnees. And you notice that Ezra and Nehemiah are both Persian officials, and you kind of put the pieces together and realize that the Persians are actually creating what we know as Judaism, because suddenly there's, they're the Zoroastrians are the only monotheists in the ancient world, and suddenly you have a new monotheism in Judaism, and things like the dietary laws, I think, came from Zoroastrianism, not just monotheism, but the violent rejection of any other gods, the whole idea of like cutting down Asherah poles and killing the priests of Baal, the idea of aniconism, and the replacing of the idea of Sheol, where all dead people go to a dreary afterlife existence, with heaven and hell based on how they lived, and the end times, which you don't see too much of in the Hebrew Bible, but a little bit in the prophets, where there's talk of like a vengeful day of the Lord. So all of that, I would say, is from Persian Zoroastrian influence, and that basically the Persians were tolerant of religions as long as they kind of molded themselves into a form of monotheism. Like with the Babylonians, they chose Marduk as their kind of one true god, and all the other gods got demoted either into angels or demons. So I think there's a much more Zoroastrian influence on the formation of Judaism at the start than is usually accepted, and I try to make a case for that. And then the Zoroastrian influence gets even stronger on, well, first of all, there's the Pharisees, whose name comes from, Persians, and they are accepting of angels and the end times and a coming Messiah. And then you have the Essenes, who are just all in on the Zoroastrian material. And I'll leave the rest for folks who want to read the book.
Yeah. Well, I know I said this before, but just to beat a dead horse, again, this is the context. And when you're in church, they don't even mention it. I went through years of Bible school, listening to endless preachers, went to Bible college, went to missionary school, and I never once heard the word Zoroastrianism, not once.
Yeah.
It's like if you heard the word context 10,000 times, but not the word Zoroastrianism. It's like those you can't tell people, I want you to give your life to this worldview, and I want you, in a sense, to metaphorically swing out onto eternity, as if this is your rope to over the flames of hell to the gates of heaven on this one savior, this hero character, and you don't even know where he came from. It just blows my mind every time when I really grasp it. It's just staggering. And what's hard to deal with too is that so many of us still have Christian loved ones who are stuck in this, who honestly their knowledge of this stuff is so limited, and when they even begin to look at it, all they can say is either that sounds ridiculous, or they don't want to even hear it. Like, I'm not even going to listen. I'm just going to put my fingers in my ears and ignore you. And you want so much to say, don't you want to know the truth? And you realize they're not committed to the truth. They're committed to their, this is our community, this is our subculture, this is our party line, and we're afraid. We're afraid of the consequences of bucking the system. It's
Mhm.
easier for us to just stay in the status quo than to step out into all these unknowns, which leads to not only losing your community, but it leads to an internal existential crisis, maybe nihilism. And they're just like, it's too scary to go that route. So I'm just going to ignore all the information, and I'm just going to assume that my church has been telling me enough information this whole time. And it's just, people don't know even the first few steps of what they need to know. But I love it. I think it's so cool to dig deeper into it. So I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. And
Absolutely.
I'm just so amazed too that it's again, it's all free. So for anyone that hasn't seen this yet, I'm sure a lot of my viewers have not yet. I'll have the link. It's just elbespurling.com/salvation. The link's beneath this video. It's 250 pages, 400 plus of illustrations and maps. I mean, that's a lot. You've done a lot of work on this. How long did it take you to write the whole thing?
The writing part was about 2 years,
Hmm. And how
and
much research before then?
total of 6 years, including the research for it. Yeah.
Hmm. Amazing stuff. Well, I would love to say, I hope you keep going on this stuff, because we need people like you who can kind of help us connect the dots. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a movie someday. We can get you and Dr. Carrier and some other people and David Fitzgerald together and get a movie script going and get someone to actually
That
make
would
this into a
really be
movie.
great. As I was writing it, it just felt like what I really like is history told as a story. And there's so much in there that like the stories of the Maccabees, with the stories of the Roman Jewish War, that is very movie-like and exciting and twists and turns. And at least I hope it's a really fun to read.
Yeah. Well, I think what's good too about it, even if people don't come to a conclusion or know what they think about it, because it's all conjecture in one sense, and it's all there's more information that will eventually come out. Wouldn't it be so
Mhm.
cool if we found another block of Dead Sea Scrolls that no one's ever seen before?
Hey, that would be
We'll
great.
change our perspective again.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, what I love is that even though it's kind of overwhelming to think about, where do we start? We're looking in the Book of Enoch. We're looking in all these other extra biblical texts. We're looking in the canonical texts. Are we looking at the Jewish Talmud and all this stuff? It's overwhelming. You bring in Josephus and yada yada. It's like, where do we even start? And a regular layperson doesn't have any way to put this together. What I love about a website like yours and a book like this is at least it gives you some really good hooks to say, all right, yeah, you probably can't grasp it all, you can't study everything, but here's some really simple things. Like, just start here and grab this. Like Zoroastrianism, that's a great place to start. If you don't know anything about anything else, start there, and then you take us through different stages. And your website literally has it, like, it's just like right down the left hand side, it's all these chapters, and you just take it step by step. But it's almost like a miniature class, and people take this as a chance to really become more educated. You'll eventually know, maybe not what you think about it all, but we'll know better questions to ask of ourselves as we go on. So I feel like you're doing a great job of just encouraging the adventure of education, and better more educated guesses, which is what this is eventually all really about. We're making educated guesses, but I think it's awesome. So I got to say, I'm a big fan of you, between what you've done with Legos, what you've done with music, and now what you're doing with your study of ancient Christianity. I'm very, very jealous of your path. So awesome stuff. Was there anything else before we wrap up that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to add on about any of these topics we've touched on?
No, I think we covered so much. It's great. Yeah, I just wanted to say to folks, I really hope it's a fun read if you do check out the book. Some people are put off by history books, but as Tim said, it's got 400 illustrations. Many of them I did with AI, and that I found endlessly useful to illustrate characters for which we can't be sure what they looked like. But I feel like there are so many names that go by in this book, it's nice to attach it to some sort of plausible face. And then other times there are events like when King Herod was falling ill, and the Jews took the opportunity to pull down the golden eagle that was that Herod had put over the main gate of the church. Real, just kind of fun action events like that. It was really fun to be able to depict those visually.
That is so cool. Awesome stuff. Well, I appreciate so much what you're doing. But I'll just wrap up by again encouraging everyone to go to your website, elbespurling.com, and get all the links beneath this video. But Elbe, you're doing this awesome work. We really appreciate you. So for everyone who has not checked it out, please go check out as well her YouTube channel. I'll have the link for that for your music. By the way, are you doing more music soon?
Recently, speaking of AI, I've gotten into using AI to create music, and that's been a lot of fun. I think there's links to that on my website, so people can check that out too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Awesome stuff. Again, everyone, please go check out her websites and YouTube channel. But Elbe, thank you so much. Great to hear your story. Great to get to know you, and we'll do it again sometime.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.